Hello, my name is Dan Brook. I'm a retired pastor and academic living in Hudson. And I'm really excited today to introduce to you a quite a remarkable human being. He'll tell you more about himself in a little bit, but I would like to tell you just a little bit about him. It's Pastor Ralph Olsen. He was the originating pastor of King of Kings Lutheran Church in Woodbury, Minnesota. Was there for 30 years, grew it from 2 people who I presume might have been him and his wife, to over 4,000 members, a highly energetic ministry. And now, most recently, has become a development officer for the Union Gospel Mission in St. Paul, now in their 111th year. And all sorts of interesting things on his journey in between those points and even before. But while we'll primarily talk about his pastoral gifts and ministries, in the course of a bit of a conversation before this, he told me another remarkable thing, and that is that he recently had gastric bypass surgery and has lost about 50 pounds in 2 months, which is nothing short of a miracle for me at least, and for many like us. So I thought we'd start by asking him first to just tell us a wee bit more about himself and a little bit about that experience before we move into the pastoral gifts he has had over the years. Pastor Ralph Olsen.
Thank you. It's nice to be here with you, Dan. I was a chronic stress eater for many years. Whenever I got stressed, I would eat chips, cookies, candy, ice cream, whatever. My wife's a nurse, and she kept saying, you need to eat healthier, you need to take care of yourself. And as time went on, I didn't listen. And I've been told that pastors should listen to their wives because they're right 99.9% of the time. But I didn't see it that way. And I was starting to get to the point where I was crabby all the time. I'd get dressed in the morning and I'd come down and I'd be sweating. And she could tell that I was having difficulty. I couldn't bend over and tie my shoes. I was out of breath walking up and down stairs. And she said, you need to see the doctor. You need to do this. And no. Because I would look at other people who were bigger and say, well, I'm not like that. I'm not that big or, that overweight, or I can still fit in one seat in the airplane. I don't need extra. But then about a year ago now, my sister-in-law had gastric bypass surgery, and she's lost 155 pounds. And she looks like Marilyn Monroe now. I mean, she's energetic, she can dance again. And she kept saying to me, you need to look at this, you need to look at this. So last August, I started a process with a psychologist and nutritionist through Abbott Northwestern. And all through that process, I kept saying, no, I'm not that bad. I'm not like them. And then came February, and I realized finally that I was in trouble and that there was something wrong with me. So I had gastric bypass surgery on the 28th of February. And since then, I've lost 53 pounds with 35 pounds to go yet. It's been an amazing journey. And what happened was when the surgeon first got in with the first cut with the camera, he knew I was in trouble. And I had grown, I almost looked like I was pregnant, and it was hard all the time. It was like I had a gigantic basketball inside me. And he looked and he said, your liver is almost shot. It's totally encased in body fat, and it should be pliable so that we can move it for the surgery, and it's hard as a rock. It's like a brick, and it's like you took your liver and dipped it in car oil. And when the surgery was over, he said to my wife, if I hadn't had the surgery, it was his professional opinion that within 6 months I would have been in full liver failure and probably could have died. And so that was really a severe wake-up call to me to realize that I had really been abusing my temple of the Lord, so to speak. And now I have a new lease on life. The amazing thing about the journey is I'm not done yet. It's a lot to learn and a lot to work on. But I realize that if I go back, I probably won't be here that long. and I have a 2.5-year-old grandson, and hopefully some more, and I'd like to be around for a while. So, yeah, it's my jacket's a little big now. They tease me a lot about maybe buying my clothes at Omar the Tent Maker or something, but I sleep all night long. I used to be up and down. I'm off my diabetes medicine. I'm off 2 other kinds of medicine. I'm probably going to be off my sleep apnea machine, which I've had for 15 years now, because I had so much extra in my throat. So it really is a new lease on life, and I'm excited. And yet I'm challenged every day because it's so easy to slip and to go back.
So what role would you say your personal faith plays in offering strength in these transitional days?
You know, I realize that my life is a gift every day. And God has really given me an incredible ability to relate to people and develop relationships. And so many people were concerned about me. You know, they could tell that there was something wrong, but, you know, they get to know you and they like you and they don't want to be totally honest with you. But since my surgery, so many people have said to me, "Oh, you look so good. Your normal color's back. You have energy. You're happy." One night at dinner, my wife took my hand and said to me, "Welcome home, honey. I've missed you the last 15 years." That's a pretty emotional, powerful statement that one says, and you don't realize it until you come out of that and you realize what you were missing and what was not there. And yet God was there all the time. You know, He's giving me clues and signs from people, but I just wasn't listening. And
You know, that might be a good segue into sharing the fact that you recently have had a book published. It's called Shaped by God's Hand. And it's a delightful biography, really, autobiography, of just the things you were talking about. So I wonder if you could kind of introduce the listener to the book, the context of it, why you wrote it, and maybe summarize for us sort of the high points and indeed some of the low points of your ministry and where you see your future taking you.
Okay. I have a unique story. I think we all have unique stories. But I was born in Chicago, inner city. My father was a factory worker, never finished high school, was also an alcoholic. And so I was born into an alcoholic family. My father was an alcoholic. My grandfather was an alcoholic. My uncle was an alcoholic. My 3 male cousins are alcoholics. None of them graduated high school. All of them found school to be boring and went to work in factories. And that was what life was. Life was made up of a lot of very difficult moments as a child. I didn't realize it at the time, but probably by the time I was 9 or 10, I was really a surrogate husband to my mother. I was her full emotional support. I was there for her all the time. She, you know, and my father and I were growing more distant as time went on because he was one way with his life, and I was just looking at my life saying, I don't know. Well, when I was 15, it came time to have a job in the summer. And of course, you'll go to the work in the factory. Well, okay, I thought, well, I need a job. So I went, and after about 3 weeks of working on a drill press where I took one chunk of metal, put it in the frame, pulled the switch, drilled the hole, took it out, put it in a box, coming home smelling like grease and oil with little cuts in my fingers, one night at the dinner table, I said, this isn't the life for me. I'm going to college. And my father says, oh, no, you're not. No one in this family has ever gone to college. And besides that, there's no money. You know, we don't have money for you to go to college. And I said, well, okay, but I want to go to college. And so I graduated from high school, and I worked 3 jobs, and I had counselors in my high school saying that I had good grades, but not that good to go to a private school, so I should be looking at state schools. But I really had my heart set on a private college, and I got accepted, and I made enough money to go there. And it wasn't easy because no one had ever done it before. There wasn't a lot of support from my father. My mother was there, but my father kind of ruled the house. And I graduated from a private college, and then I was going to be a teacher, and my pastor started working on me, and he said, "You should go to seminary." And oh, no. And somehow, through all of these things, God was active and alive, and I wasn't, it wasn't like a big cloud or a fiery bush. But there was a stirring inside of me that said, I don't know. Maybe I should check this out. And so I applied to what was then called Northwestern Seminary in St. Paul. It's now Luther Seminary. And naive 22-year-old, I left Chicago at 5 o'clock at night, driving to a city I'd never been to a school I'd never seen, in a state that I'd never been to. And of course, everyone thought I was nuts. And I arrived at 11 o'clock at night, and it was locked up. I thought it was like college, but no, it wasn't. It was all locked up. And I slept in the car, and the next day I enrolled. And for that whole first year, I just said, what am I doing here? I mean, these professors aren't even talking about Earth. They were in such heady kinds of things, and I was just kind of going, what does Greek and Hebrew have to do with a person sitting in the pew? I don't know how many of them have really taken that. And at the end of my first year, I went into my advisor and I said, well, I'm done. I'm never coming back. And he looked at me and just said, well, I'll see you in the fall. And I looked at him and I thought, are you deaf? And I said, I don't know if you heard me correctly, Dr. Bushman, but I'm not coming back. This makes absolutely no sense to me. Oh, well, okay. We'll see you in the fall. And I just went, all right, fine. I started to walk out of his office, and he said, come back here. And I came back, and he said to me, I see you and your little buddies betting on Monday Night Football in the cafeteria during football season, so I'm going to make you a bet. I said, oh. He said, if you're back here as a student in the fall, you owe my wife and I dinner at those old Mr. Steak. You could get a steak and a potato and salad for $5.95. And he says, is it a deal? And I thought, well, that's the easiest bet I've ever made. There's no way I'm coming back here. Oh, I shook on it. And then I was in the cafeteria about an hour later, and a pastor came up to me and started talking to me, and I had no idea who he was. And the next thing you know, I agreed to go to Brainerd, Minnesota to work with youth for a summer. And I'd never really worked with youth, and I certainly hadn't done a lot of work with visiting homebound members, but that was what I was supposed to do. And I would go out and visit these elderly gentlemen and ladies, and they would say, oh, you're going to be such a wonderful pastor. God has given you such incredible gifts to be a pastor. And yep. Have another cookie. Oh, I need another cookie. And I was really confused. And then one day I was in a park in Brainerd, and I sat down on a bench, and I looked up to the sky, and I said, Lord, I said, if this is what you want me to do, which I'm not sure it is, but if this is what you really want me to do, I need a sign. And I said, a burning bush would be nice, but there aren't many bushes around here. A voice from a cloud would be okay, because that was in the Bible. That was a blue sky, there were no clouds. And I said, well, and I just sat there on this bench. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this gentle breeze comes up. And it kind of went over me. And in that breeze, I believe I heard a voice. And the voice said, Ralph, I've already given you all the gifts that you need to shepherd my people. All you need to do is put your hand in mine, trust, and I'll lead. And then it was gone. And you kind of sit there on the bench and you kind of shake your head saying, did that really just happen? But I felt this pull to go back. And so I did. And the first person I saw on campus the first day of the fall was Dr. Bushman. And he said to me, Sunday night, 6 o'clock, Mr. Steak, and don't forget your wallet. And we went out to dinner, and at the end of dinner, I said, how did you know that I would be back? And he said, because I saw it in your eyes. Your heart and your head hadn't made the connection, but now I see it. He says, and I'm going to tell you that you are going to have an incredible ministry. You may not think it, but you're going to go travel around the world. You're going to do all kinds of mission projects here, and your wealth at the end of your journey probably will not be in possessions, but it will be in the relationships with the people that you've developed, and you're going to be blessed. And he was right. I still, I don't know how he could be so wise, but 6 months later he died from cancer, and I lost an incredible friend, but I've never forgotten his influence on my life.
It's a great story. Can you give us some examples of his prediction coming true?
Well, I was blessed to meet a pastor by the name of Gary Langness, and he was the senior pastor at Augustana Lutheran Church in West St. Paul. And I interviewed with him for a possibility of a call. And he had a unique sense of humor. And who was I? And so the first interview, we were about halfway through it, and he says to me, what is your personal philosophy on generosity? And I sat there like a deer in the headlights. And he looked at me and he said, you don't have one, do you? I said, well, I guess not. He said, well, then this interview's over. And I went, oh, okay. So I started to get up to leave. What did I? And he goes, where are you going? And I said, well, you said the interview's over, so I'm leaving. No, sit down, he says. And he wrote down 3 names and 3 phone numbers. And he said, this is your assignment. I want you to call these people. I want you to go visit them in their home. And I want you to ask them about their personal philosophy on generosity. Listen to their story. And then come back and tell me what you learned. And so I did. And these 3 people all had a unique understanding about generosity and sharing their blessings with others, and how they all at one point in their life weren't with the program, as Gary would call it. They were pretty much into their own world and doing their own things, but there were events in each of their lives that kind of transformed them. And so I went back and I told him what I learned, and he said, well, we're very good. He said, you did a wonderful job. Only one problem. That's their story. You have to create your own story on generosity. And my parents had never talked about money. They hadn't talked about saving. They were basically unchurched. So I was just a little miracle that happened along the way. And I got called to that church, and I spent 5 years there under Gary. And I learned so much from him about generosity, about people, and that God really did want me to be a pastor. And then in 1980, I got an opportunity to go to Woodbury, Minnesota to do church development. And I kind of liked where I was. It was familiar. I had there was staff, there were buildings. Going to the mission development field, there was no congregation, there was no building, there was no staff, there was nothing. But my wife could keep her job. She was a nurse and worked in Maplewood, so that was good for her. All right. And so my first job was to knock on every door of every house in Woodbury. And I did that 10 hours a day, 6 days a week for 3 months, just about 4,000 doors, inviting people who were unchurched or had fallen away from church to think about being part of a new church. And they would say, well, I've really been away from the church and I'm not really. And I said, but the beauty of this new church, nobody knows your past. We all start fresh together. And we can, with God's help, we can create this congregation and it can be whatever we want it to be. Oh, well, I think I could check that out, And God blessed it year after year after year until it grew to be one of the larger congregations in the ELCA. And when I left after 30 years, we had staff, we had facilities, we had programming, We had mission work in the cities. We had mission work in Honduras and Jamaica and Russia and Tanzania. And 30 years seemed like a good run. And so I decided that was enough. But you should never leave something unless you know that you've got something to go to. But that was an important journey for me as a person, as a husband, as a father, because after I left my congregation in June of 2010, I went 22 months without a job. And I had resumes out all over the place. I had 60-some resumes out. And I had 50 interviews. And I would go into an interview and think, man, this is great, I'm going to be good. And then I'd get that letter saying, thanks, but no thanks. And you begin to doubt yourself. You begin to wonder if you're really not who you thought you were. You know, if you really had created this facade of who you are. And then one day I had an opportunity to interview at Union Gospel Mission to be a planned giving officer. And I went down and I interviewed, and it went really well, like so many of the other ones. And I walked out of the building, and I looked up to the sky, and I said a little prayer. And I said, okay, Lord, you know, the two of us have been on this journey now for 22 months. I know you have a plan for my life. Obviously, we haven't found it yet. But I have, and I know I'm supposed to be patient, and I'm trying, but I've got a feeling that this is where I should be. It takes me kind of back to my inner city roots, multi-ethnic, lower income people, which is what I grew up with. And I don't know, but I just feel that this could be it. And a couple hours later, they called and offered me a job. And it was like, thank you, you know. So that's where I am now. And I call myself the grand schmoozer. I go out every day and I just talk to people about life, and I build relationships, and I thank them for their compassion for the poor, and I invite them to think about a legacy gift after their death. And it's really a lot of fun. And I'm not eating cookies now because that's not allowed anymore with my new weight loss and my new diet. So I'm learning how to say no.
It's great. I'm just going to back up a little bit, though, and pick up on your discussion of generosity. So, because I'm sure everybody is wondering, as I am, what is your definition of generosity now?
Well, I think it's captured in my personal mission statement, which I've written, which is to be a reflection of God's love every day by my words and my actions, that I might be a messenger of hope and encouragement to the people God puts in my path. Everything that I have, I know, is a gift from God. I didn't always know that, you know. I think we all struggle with that. We struggle with, well, I earned this. This is mine, you know, and stuff. But what I've discovered in this journey is that the more that I've trusted, or my wife and I have trusted God, the more that we have shared with others, the more we seem to be blessed. And because you can't outgive God. And yet so many people live in a state of scarcity. You know, if I give it away, I may not have it for myself. But we've discovered the joy of sharing, and it's always there. Why it's there and how it's there, I don't know, other than I think God just says in the scripture, to whom much is given, much is required. And yet it seems to me, from my perspective, that the more we have, the less generous many people get. They don't realize and what could be done. And I think that's the call of all of us, is to make a difference every day, even if it's just a little thing. And so my wife says that she's the realist and that I'm the dreamer, and that I would give away everything we own, trusting God, where she thinks we should have a little more fiscal responsibility. She reads the Bible and says, God also expects you to be a good steward. I said, well, I am a good steward. She goes, yes, but you also need to provide for your family. Oh, well, I suppose that's true. But I just discover that even the tiniest gift can make a difference. And it's not always money. It can be a smile to someone who just looks lonely. It can be just a greeting to someone on the street. That's being generous with your soul, with your spirit. And we have a lot of people out there today looking for a friend. They're looking to have their spirit charged. When I used to teach confirmation, the first night of confirmation, I would give every one of the kids a piece of paper that had a string attached to it, and it had the letters IALAC. And I would say to them, what does this say? This is a sentence. I don't know, I lack. And I said, it stands for I am lovable and capable. You see, because God created each one of us uniquely gifted and talented, and we're all lovable and capable. And every morning when we get up, God puts this sign around our neck. And then we go off to school. And one of the kids we know, our friends, say, oh, that's an ugly shirt. Or, oh, gee, where'd you buy those clothes? And it rips a little bit on your sign. And then you go to class, and then the teacher says, oh, you really screwed up this project, or just rip. And you come home some days from work or school or whatever, and you feel like about this big. Like, why did you even create me? Because I am worthless. I mean, I'm not lovable and capable. I've got nothing here except a string. My whole sign is gone. But the amazing thing about God's generosity is that tomorrow, when you wake up, there's another sign. Because he hasn't given up on you, and he cares about you. And we have so many people searching for that kind of awareness, understanding that they are lovable and capable. And yeah, there are going to be days when you think you're about this big, but God never sees you that way. And so I think that's where generosity comes in too. There's an old Bible camp song, love is like a magic penny, hold it tight, but lend it, spend it, you'll have so many, because it comes back to you. And there was an Italian woman by the name of Mama D, and she had a restaurant over in Dinkytown on the U campus. And on the Feast of St. Joseph, which is in March, she would open her restaurant at 6 o'clock in the morning. And all day long, she would feed spaghetti to anyone who came to the restaurant. And she didn't charge them a penny. Whether they were students, whether they were execs, whether they were street people, she would feed them because her philosophy was that life was a round table. And what you share with others will come back to you. If you share blessings, blessings will return. If you share evil or negativity will come back. And that so impacted me when I stood in line one year as a seminary student. We didn't have a lot of money, so we went for free spaghetti. And I met her, and just the joy of her heart. And so one of the greatest things that you can have in ministry is when someone in your church, whether it's an adult or a young person, gets it. And the light bulb goes on, so to speak, and you see the change in their personhood because they understand what it's about. And when you go globally and you do mission work and you meet people who have what we would consider nothing, but they have everything because they have the joy of generosity. And they can teach us, so much.
Well, as I just took a glance at my watch, we're having really a fantastic time, and I hate to sort of think in terms of anything that's a little, I wouldn't say negative, but a matter of concern as we sort of work toward closing this, because we'll close on something much higher than this. But it's bothered me also as a retired pastor that for almost 30 years now, the old-time denominational churches, including a Lutheran, of which both of us are a part, have shown a declining membership. The Episcopalian brothers and sisters have, Congregational, Presbyterian, Methodist, virtually all of them in decline. As a person who's fought the good fight and undoubtedly has many more good fights ahead of you, let's start here. To what would you attribute that decline, and what ideas might you have to turn things around so that the enthusiasm that you exude and the spirit that you have could be shared with more rather than less?
I think, for many, many years, the mainline denominations, it was kind of like, open the door and the people will come, okay? Or build the building. If you build it, they will come, kind of like the Field of Dreams. But that's not the case anymore, okay? It also was growing up that if you moved to a new town and you were Lutheran, you would look for the Lutheran church. Mm-hmm. But times changed. People became consumer Christians, so to speak. They would shop. So they would go to the Methodist church, and they would go to the Baptist church, and they'd go to the Lutheran church. And then they kind of find the one that perhaps maybe felt good, or, well, they got good youth programs and we got kids, so let's go there. And maybe we were Lutheran, but now we're disciples of Christ. And you get all these things of, I think we're more consumer Christians than we were before. If this isn't right, I don't, the youth program's better over here, well, we'll just change. And so we have a lot of people today who are shopping, and they just change. There's no longevity. There's no commitment to that congregation. The other thing I think that has happened is we became entrenched within our own four walls, okay? And the world around us was changing. Being an inner city kid, I never thought that I would be in suburbia for my entire ministry. But that's where God put me. And the challenge to me was I felt like an Old Testament prophet who had a message to say there's a world out there. It's not far away. But we seem to have put up this invisible wall that surrounds us in the community of Woodbury. And as long as everything inside the kingdom is happy, that's great, okay? But I felt the call to lift the eyes of people over those invisible walls, and the thing to do it is mission. It's reaching out to people. And that's what helped our church grow, because I kept saying the heart of a congregation is known by what it shares with others beyond its four walls. And so we were always looking to say, how can we put our people into action out there? And there's too many churches that they kind of like, well, it's comfortable. Well, our neighborhood is changing, and then be out there, okay? Get out there and meet your neighbors. Have a picnic. Have something where you bring the neighbors together. Find out what they do. Find out what their story is. We've lost that feeling. We live in neighborhoods and we don't even know our neighbors. Well, we know them like this. You drive by and they're outside and you wave at them, but you don't know who they are because we don't take time to get to know them. We don't sit. The church isn't that center of people's lives anymore. It's something on their checklist. And, okay, we went to church, that's good. Well, that's not really faith. That's just, you spend an hour in church. Faith is taking what you experience, the love of Christ, and putting it into action. Because without action, without mission, it really isn't faith.
Well, let's say your next book is an update of the old book, Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, and it said, everything I need to know I learned from Pastor Ralph Olsen. What would the first two things you write about in that book say? Or even one?
I would say one thing would be love life. Be enthusiastic. Enthusiasm in Greek, in theos, in God, okay? Be happy with what you have. See this as a great blessing. That would be one thing. And the second thing would be, it was Mother Teresa who said, do small things with great love, okay? It doesn't, sometimes we think we have to do these great, big, humongous things. No, it's as simple as a smile. It's as simple as holding the door for an elderly person to get into the grocery store. To see the smile on their face, I mean, that's what we need to do. And that's what we should be looking at. You know, how can we make a difference? And in my book, I tell the story of a man who's at the beach, and many people have heard it's called the starfish, and all these starfish have washed up on the sand, and he knows that if they don't go back to the water, they're going to die. They're off their source. So he's bending down, picking them up, and gently putting them back in the water. Well, there's another man who's watching this for a while, and he's shaking his head, and he walks over to the man, and he says, what are you doing? Do you think that you can save all the starfish on all the sands of this beach? And the man doesn't say anything. He just bends down, he picks up another starfish, and he gently throws it back in the water. He turns and says to the visitor, it made a difference to that one, didn't it? And that's what we're called to do, to make a difference. One person, one day, one event at a time. We're called to be bold and be courageous and be committed to making a difference. That's in my book.
Speaking of the book again, this is Pastor Olsen's book, Shaped by God's Hand. Do you want to tell the viewers where that can be acquired?
Amazon.com.
Mm-hmm.
It can be acquired also from my website, which is PastorRalphOlsen.com. They can go on there and send me a note, and I'll send them. I have, in a span of a little over 2 months, I've sold 600 books.
That's great.
And when I got the books, my wife said, are you nuts? You got how many books? I said, 1,000. What? 1,000? So you get a better price at 1,000. Well, how are you ever going to sell 1,000? I said, don't worry. You know, God inspired this. It's going to happen. So now we're at 600. And, yeah.
So now people know maybe the last 400 will go in the next few days.
Well, I hope so. I hope people on this show will say, we should get a copy of his book.
Thank you so much,
absolutely.
Pastor Olsen, for giving of your time and your life on the behalf of so many people in the area. And maybe by God's grace, we will meet here again. I hope so. In the meanwhile, blessings on losing the next and last 35 pounds and on whatever paths your ministry takes
Very
you
good.
on.
Thank you.
Thank
very
you.
much.
God
Thank
bless.
You. Yeah.